To make the case for Canadian film, it's important to know what's what. Canadian filmmakers work in a system that is specifically designed to help them succeed. So how do filmmakers fund their films? Canada's feature film funding system builds its movies on a three-legged stool model. The first leg is direct funding from the government, such as telefilm or provincial production funds. The second leg is labor tax credits that reduce the cost of employing cast and crew. The third is the market, distributors and broadcasters who pay license fees for Canadian or international rights. More than 100 feature films get made each year, but how do these films get to audiences? That brings us to distribution. Canadian distributors buy the media rights from Canadian producers before the film is made, which helps complete the finance plan and gives other investors, like Telefilm, confidence that the movie will be marketed and made available to cinemas, streaming platforms, broadcasters, schools, and airplanes in a professional way. Unlike in broadcasting, where broadcasters are required to make about 1/3 of their content homegrown, there are no quotas for Canadian content in cinema, and most movies that are seen here are from Hollywood. Only about 10% are independent, of which 5% are international independent cinema, and the other 5% are from Quebec and the rest of Canada. Canada's independent movie distributors are the ones that bring that 10% of non-Hollywood films to the Canadian market. This is the system that has existed since before the use of the internet and is governed by the Broadcast Act. The Broadcast Act was last updated in 1991. While the world changed around us, Canadian cultural policy stayed focused on broadcasters, until now. Bill C-10 is a proposal to modernize the Broadcast Act. It will define the powers given to the CRTC, who manage the nitty-gritty of license terms for broadcasters, like CTV, CBC, Global, and Rogers, and how to license the streamers such as Amazon Video, Netflix, Crave, and Hulu to level the playing field. Also, for the first time, the Act proposes to require programming that reflects the viewpoints of Indigenous people and all of Canada's many and diverse communities. Online streaming has disrupted the distribution landscape for film, blurring the lines between broadcast and theatrical distribution, creating a unique niche in between the two. As this legislation is developed, we believe it's important to consider feature-length film in the mix. So what should the future look like for cinema? And how can we make sure that the new rules benefit a more inclusive, competitive industry?
Bonjour, hi everyone. My name is Claudia Hébert. I am a host and culture reporter for Radio-Canada. It's a pleasure for me to be here today for the second panel of the Making the Case for Canadian Film Symposium. At today's topic, Lessons from the World. So for the next hour, we will share perspectives on the international marketplace. We will explore the way Canadian films are distributed abroad and how other countries are creating a space for domestic culture in this globalized paradigm right now. So with me to share their insights, I have, first of all, in Mexico, Nicolás Celis. He's a producer, founder of Pimienta Films, which has been named one of the 3 best production houses in Mexico by the magazine Variety. And Nicolás has collaborated with directors like Jonas Cuarón, Ciro Guerra, Amat Escalante, Alfonso Cuarón, and that's for the film Roma, winner, of course, of 3 Oscars and the Golden Lion in Venice. I also have in Quebec and Montreal, Annick Poirier, sales agent, co-founder of Wasabi Films. She was previously SVP for CV International, E1's boutique film sales outfit, and she was representing award-winning independent films and documentaries from around the world, including films by Xavier Dolan. Also with us, Liza Diño, Chairperson and CEO of the Film Development Council of the Philippines. She's in Manila and it's the middle of the night. So we thank her very much for being with us. Hi, Liza. So she's very involved in initiatives that bring together heads of film agencies from around the world to brainstorm best practice in public funding for filmmaking. She's also a film, TV, and stage actress. And we have Rob Cousins. He's VP of Film at Cineplex. He has been with Cineplex for over 18 years. He brought to Cineplex programming films in Hindi, Punjabi, Chinese, Korean, Filipino, so different languages to the screen in Canada. And before being at Cineplex, he worked in government, in production, and in distribution. Thank you all for being here with us. And I'm going to start with Liza and Nicolás to ask about your industries at home, the film industry at home. How is it in Mexico and how is it in the Philippines to get people to see films, to see national films on the big screen, and also for those films to travel internationally? Let's start with Liza.
Okay, well, Philippines is primarily a very domestic industry. In the last 100 years, it's very insular. We make films for Filipino audiences. So this has resulted to around 30% market share for Filipino films versus Hollywood films. And, you know, in the advent of the digital space and international distribution, films are now being made for international distribution. We're co-producing more. And I think it's just the right time because our films, we've already have a captured local market and we're ready to hopefully be able to distribute films in other countries as well.
And why do you think that you have this special bond with the Filipino audience that they go see your film?
Well, if your industry understands the palette, the sensibilities of your local audience, you come up with a lot of popular films that work. And while it's creating, you know, a very formulaic popular cinema, it's also creating an audience that would really follow Filipino films. So the Philippine industry loves, it's a star-driven industry. We love our celebrities. We have love teams here where, you know, big actors and big actresses are paired together. They make a film and it's really a hit. We can have films here that are actually going head-to-head with a Marvel film on December. We even have film festivals that are just showcasing Filipino films for a straight 2 weeks. All of the screens all over the Philippines just screen these Filipino films, and it created this following, this support for our local content.
Yeah, let's go to Mexico. How is it for you, Nicolás? I know you had so many success stories, Mexican directors who went to Hollywood and made a name for themselves way beyond the frontier of Mexico. But are those films seen by the audience in Mexico?
Well, Mexico is a very complex territory for Mexican films. We're producing around 220 films a year. When I started 15 years ago, there were around 30. So there's been a boom in terms of production, but only 10% of our audience goes to see Mexican films. So it's a little bit tricky. So it's a very big market. We have more than 300 million tickets sold per year. So we have more than 6,000 screens. So Mexico is a good place to release films, but not Mexican films necessarily. I think that the language barrier, it's complicated. Like we grew up watching films with subtitles, even, you know, like we used to read films. I think that the experience I had with Roma, for example, that we managed to make a movie in Spanish, you know, 2 hours long, black and white, no stars, and get it available in, you know, more than 190 countries, and have this presence in the festival and award circuits, that made me realize how there's, you know, more openness for foreign language films. You know, in that sense, I feel that platforms, at least on our end, has helped us to make our movies more profitable and more commercial, because also I've done a lot of documentary films, and before I had the challenge that there were not many spaces theatrical to release them theatrically in the country and also abroad. But with platforms' interest in documentary films, that has changed a lot. So I do feel that also platforms have had a lot of openness in local language, which that's what I've been working on the 15 years, as Liza just said about the interest in local content. I think that has been growing because for me, making authentic movies from my region is my strongest weapon, let's say, for my movies. I'm not trying just to copy the US model or Hollywood model that before that's, I think, what people thought in here that would work.
And now we come back to Canada. Let's ask Annick. We know Quebec is a bit different than Canada. Canadian films, sometimes they disappear into the American offer. Quebec, they have their own star system in that we echo what Liza was saying. And yet people don't necessarily go to see the films in theaters. What's your take on the state of cinema in Canada right now?
Well, it's interesting because I think there's a complexity with the latest pandemic, and I think it's increased the challenges. I think from a Quebec standpoint, it depends of the film if they're supported or not by local audiences. Obviously, the art house films are struggling. The Quebec art house films are struggling. It's difficult. And then the ones that are more commercial with, the high level cast that are recognizable in Quebec are getting, more support from the Quebec audience. And those can warrant box offices that, can go over the $3 million mark. But, there's been better days. There's been days in Quebec where Bon Cop, Bad Cop did $12.3 million just in the Quebec box office. I think those days are gone. Unfortunately, I don't want to be negative, but it's a challenge now. And I'm just wondering now how there's a habit that is created when you go to the cinema, and I think people, which are not necessarily art driven, of saying I want to go to the cinema like I would go to the play, like I would go to the concert, that are going purely for entertainment. I hope to God that these people will come back to the cinema to enjoy this. But it's like saying we'll have to work on the habit. And I think there's going to be some requests from the government, which is very involved in our industry, to help out with that and try to get people back in cinemas. But to come back to your initial question, I think English Canada is even more difficult for it to be recognized by its own population. We've seen it even with films like Xavier Dolan, when there was Mommy, there was other films that he did, which did quite well in Quebec. They weren't necessarily seen very much in the rest of Canada. There is a cultural difference, and it's not necessarily pleasing to the rest of Canada unless you have the art house driven people that will be interested by those types of films, but also art house films from around the world. It's hard to draw lines. I think the heydays where Quebec was, the Quebec films represented 20% of the whole Quebec industry and of the whole industry in Quebec, where the rest was either French or American films. We haven't seen those. I think now it's well under the 10% mark of the Quebec films actually being seen by Quebecers. Rest of Canada, I think it's even harder. I think the distribution. Also, the distribution industry is struggling. There's a lot of distributors. There used to be bigger ones that were more active. E1 has really taken a step back since they've been bought by Hasbro. There's a few of those bigger guys that can actually help fund Quebec films or Canadian films in general. So it's changing. Change isn't bad. It has to make you go into a whole different perspective and be open-minded and see what the other opportunities are. Contrary to Nicolás, I think you've been very, very lucky to have a black and white 2-hour film, you know, in Spanish, bought by our friends at Netflix. I can tell you as a sales agent, we have not made a deal with Netflix for years because, you know, they're doing their own productions. And I think you're benefiting from that, which is great. So it's a different perspective. I think it's challenging.
Rob Cousin from Cineplex, are these days of Canadian films like Bon Cop, Bad Cop bringing the big bucks, are these days gone, like Annick thinks?
I don't think they're entirely gone, but I think the ability to pull an audience together in a mass quantity for a singular film like what we saw in Quebec in past years has been dissipated by other entertainment options that are available for them to see these films. I think it's very hard to pull a central group together over one film and have them concentrate on that film in the same way that we were used to say. Quebec also, let's be honest, Quebec has had a brain drain in the last few years where a lot of prominent directors have moved down to the United States to explore other opportunities. So we go through this ebb and flow of directors who rise to the top, who create films that the market enjoys and comes out and sees, and then they go off and explore other opportunities. You know, we in Canada are sitting on top of a beast. And that beast is the United States film industry, which comes with all of the mass marketing support behind it. And it can be very difficult to get noticed on the other side of all of that.
But then can I make a link with what we were saying about Roma and Nicolás in Mexico? Because you say prominent directors in Quebec move on to other things, but you have examples in Mexico. Those directors, they left, they did big projects, they came back, and then they do projects like Roma. So yeah. Couldn't we have something like this happening, that fame is brought back to us?
We can absolutely have something like that. Denis Villeneuve may decide to come back to Quebec and make a film because he cannot get it made within the system of Hollywood.
There you go.
So there are those opportunities. They just haven't appeared yet, but there are those. And we also talk about the Canadian film industry as some sort of sweeping from coast to coast industry, or kind of a homogenous industry across the country. But where we're starting to see success, and where success is really starting to grow out for us, is in regions. It's not in finding that one film that speaks to Canadians from coast to coast, although we certainly have those. You know, a few years ago we had Maudie, which started as an East Coast film, told an East Coast story, and Mongrel Media, the distributor, was able to market that across the entire country to groups, and it became a success because of that. But what we're seeing more and more is small films out of Newfoundland, small films out of BC, small films out of Ontario, that maybe don't reach entirely across the entire country, but speak to the regions in which they are made. So we can't just look at everything, I think, as a homogenous, what works from Newfoundland all the way to Vancouver Island, although there will be those, but what works on the West Coast? Is it a success? Is it a failure just because it only works on the West Coast? We have to kind of define what we consider success to be too. We all want the big national films that becomes part of the general conversation for Canadians, but it's also a success to be a homegrown hit in your own region too. And we should work towards a lot of that. And that's one of the goals of Cineplex moving forward, is to look at more regional films and speak to regional audiences instead of a homogenous across the board way of thinking.
So really curate your programming according to regions, but then you're not required to play Canadian movies at Cineplex on the screens. We don't regulate and let's say force you to play Canadian films, but do you feel that you should maybe have quotas and a responsibility to make sure that you're showing films that are national?
I don't know how a quota gets somebody to get off their couch and go watch a movie if they've heard of the movie, if they don't feel incentivized to go watch that movie. To me, that what we really need is a strong marketing program in Canada that really nurtures an audience about the value of the films that are being presented in front of them. We see a lot of films that are great. We love playing them. We are a Canadian company. I want to play Canadian film, but the audience hasn't heard of them. And whether that's through distributors who aren't spending enough money on the marketing of the films. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of really, really great distributors out there who want to see the success of Canadian film. But it's a very tough market to get people to be aware of something when they're surrounded by so much of other content day in and day out.
But then would it help if there was a special fund maybe to help distributors or theaters to help them book Canadian films? Do you think it could be a great incentive to get those films booked for sure?
Right now, we book as much Canadian film as we can get that is going to support itself within that experience. I can give anybody a screen. We had a great success a couple of years ago in Toronto with a film called, I wrote it down because I wanted to remember this specifically, which was Brown Girl Begins, where the producer and the filmmaker just called us directly. They said, we'd really like to play this film in downtown Toronto. Can we have the opportunity? We talked to them. We felt their passion behind it. But the key to the success of that film in Toronto was they worked it. We say to everybody who comes at us, a screen is an opportunity, and it's your opportunity to get your film to work. And if you're working the ground, if you're out there getting people knowing about your film, you can stay on that screen. You know, we always say to everybody, you don't need to be #1 in one of our buildings, but you need to be sort of middle top. You got to be in a building in which things will open and things will lower, and things will open and things will lower, but you'll kind of stay constant. And
but there's the pressure of the first weekend, though, where if you don't do well the first weekend, they take you off the screen. So there's a pressure to perform really quickly, as word to mouth could work as well.
I think the myth of the first weekend getting yanked out is just that, sort of a myth. Our goal is to keep everybody on screen and give you an opportunity to prove yourself. The myth of the first weekend became because the numbers were so low on some films that the situation just warranted having to take the film off, because let's face it, it is an economic business. But we're not looking to do that. If you can sort of stay and prove yourself, and we know that you are a filmmakers or a group of distributors that are going to work that film, that are going to seize upon the opportunity that being on screen provides, we're not there to take you off. As I said before, we're Canadians. We want Canadian films to succeed. I just don't want to be working with the studios all the time. I want to work with passionate filmmakers and passionate distributors that are going to be pushing and promoting their films.
There's a question we want to ask the audience, because the conversation is going to continue on Reddit with after this panel. So we want to know, do you think we should, like I just asked Rob, give money from culture funding sources to help book Canadian films into theaters to be sure that those films are seen and booked across the country? So you can answer the question yes or no if you feel that it could be a solution, or if it's taking money away from making films. So we can't wait to see your answers to that question. I want to go back a little bit. Annick, you were saying to Nicolás, you're lucky that you had such a strike of success with Roma. How much did the VOD help, Nicolás? Because yes, you partnered with Netflix and it gave it a boost. Do you think you would have the same success? Yes, the Oscars, and yes, Venice, but reaching the audience. Would have people gone to see it in theaters the way they did at home with Netflix?
Yeah, I feel we had a very special case in terms that we had to experience both of the best theatrical and platform experience, because we did have a lot of theatrical presence in the world. We had more than 40 countries theatrical release. We were in more than 40 countries, and we also were available in the platform. So I think that we had that chance. I do feel that, you know, for a 2-hour film, black and white, you know, that even if there's an audience for all of Alfonso's films and everything, I feel that it's a challenge, and I think that Alfonso managed to get the best of the two worlds. But at least to me, it really showed me how the world was working right now, because I do a lot of art house movies, and it's very hard to position them theatrically in many countries. Like, even if I have a great author, it's not easy to go to do, you know, more than 10 countries or 20 countries nowadays. It's very hard. It's very expensive for distributors. So a combination of both schemes, you know, was great in that case for us. And that's what I'm implementing in my new movies, you know, to understand what does my movie really needs, because not all movies have to be released in 100 countries theatrically. You know, it's like not every movie have to have that life. So maybe, you know, I do defend to have a theatrical release and a big, you know, marketing campaign in my own country, plus my co-producers territories. And then, you know, I do, you know, a very well planned release in a platform that understands that, you know, that the whole strategy on my film. I do believe that, you know, there's something we need to learn from what's going on with the platforms, because I always fight for my directors and to understand what are their goals, because I don't think you can have everything in all of your movies. I feel that in some movies you might, you know, do 10 festivals or 20 festivals, plus, you know, use that momentum to do the theatrical release, you know, because, for example, I was analyzing the release of Amores Perros, you know, or Y Tu Mamá También, you know, that when they went to Cannes 20 years ago, that they came out theatrically right away, you know. And sometimes with other movies, you do festivals for a year, then you go out, then, you know, there's no awareness. So I do feel that it's still a challenge to have, you know, like all the love from the festivals, from theatrical releases, and from platforms at the same time. But I think it's a mix of all of them, because nowadays, for example, if you're working with new directors, maybe going straight to a platform is not the right way, because, you know, nobody knows who those directors are. So you have to build up, you know, their careers and put them in as strong as possible into the map, as other directors, you know, can go directly, you know, to SVOD, you know, after certain festivals. So I just learned that I need to be more flexible, because, you know, I'm a moviegoer, I'm a partner in cinemas, in cinema chains, sorry, in Mexico, and I feel that, as Robert was saying, you know, like, one thing is to have the space for a movie, and then it's, you know, people going to see that movie. As going to festivals, sometimes you go and, you know, you might be in a great festival, but nobody went to your screening, and it's a matter of a combination of, you know, of understanding your movie as a producer, and trying to get the best strategy, you know, as possible to the movie. In Mexico, we do have we have the quota for Mexican films, we have supports, you know, for distribution of the films, and that doesn't really change the way things work. You know, like, you just have more money that you can, you know, spend it in 1 week, you know, doing advertising, or you can spend it smartly to really make people go to the cinemas. But at the end, I feel that we as producers have to really understand our movies, because sometimes I feel a big disconnection on that. Between expectations and reality.
Liza, is there such a tug of war between in theaters and VOD for your films in Philippines?
Well, because of the pandemic, of course, you know, streaming has become the platform for newly produced films. But the Philippines is really 80% brick and mortar. You know, it's really the first window of theatrical that creates this maximum revenue for our local films. I mean, I've been listening to the panelists talking about like space for your local films, and I think what's unique about the Philippines and how we were able to create interest for our local audiences is to create an event out of our films through our national film festivals. I mean, this is really like a whole of government and industry approach, where new set of films, newly produced films, will have a 2-week run in all cinemas nationwide. So we call it the Metro Manila Film Festival, which happens in December. This is the only festival that's like disrupting the Star Wars global release. And because the films are doing well, we're able to keep this festival for the last 45 years. And then, of course, with a new generation and new wave of art house filmmakers, independent film producers who are also making films for a more diverse audience, we created a new festival, and that was what the FDCP, my film commission, organized. It's called the Festival of Filipino Films, which happens every September, and it's for an entire week. We write the cinemas. We ask for their support. We ask that all 1,000 screens in the whole of Philippines will just play all of these films for that entire week, just so that we can create that support. And we are already on our 5th year, and out of the 30 films that we released for the last 4 years, around 12 are already on Netflix, and other films are already traveling in international film festivals and actually being screened in competitions and other showcase for these festivals. So I think we have generated that support because we also created the need for, and we made them look forward to these 8 new films. We hype it up. I mean, our entire agency is going all over the Philippines, the 7,641 islands in the country, to make sure that they know about these films. We work with TV networks so that we can promote these films. So it's really our way of activating and really really excite the audiences to look forward to these new films released during that time.
And when it's time to take those films and take them out of the country and show them internationally, what's the strategy here? And of course, you pick a great film you believe in, but what makes you believe in the film, in its chances to grab the attention of an international audience? Is it the team? What is it?
Well, we have 2 films that are have created a track in the international international market. Of course, we have a track of these auteur filmmakers who are really showcasing and their films are featured in A-list film festivals. Lav Diaz, Brillante Mendoza. I mean, these filmmakers have really created a mark and space in the art house market. But for this more commercial films, we're starting it regionally because Asia is big. Southeast Asia is we have a lot of similar stories. There are a lot of similar sensibilities, and we're trying to understand how we can tap into those similarities of our market and our audiences. And we are now we have all of these partnerships in distributing these films in these markets. We didn't know that in South Africa, they have the same setup where 90% of the films are also romantic movies. So we find those countries that have similar sensibilities as the Philippines. Latin American countries are also, there's also, a bit similar in terms of stories, in terms of themes. So we really want to be realistic in terms of our approach. But in terms of our art house films, of course, we have created a following in terms of an art house in Germany, in France, and these are the markets that we are tapping, especially when we have a new Lav Diaz or a new Brillante Mendoza film that's coming out and competing in these A-list festivals.
And Nick, for you as a sales agent, how is it when you try to place films internationally? Do you, like Liza, look at who likes rom-coms and who likes what and try to place films like this, or it's not exactly how you play things?
Well, it depends of the films I have, but we don't do that many rom-coms because it just depends. So we're very art house driven. We're very festival dependent. So for us, we have someone who's actually dedicated. That's her job to actually put films into festivals because, when you're dealing with art house, you're dealing most often with non-established directors. And so you need to get them known. And as Nicolás was saying earlier on, they need to be, exposed. Festivals are the best way, and they curate. So let's say a film goes to Cannes. Well, already you've positioned your film, and the film will have a different life than if it goes to, I would say, the Miami Film Festival. Not that the Miami Film Festival isn't good, but it's a very different type of festival. So you already have that seal of approval. But even now, like we had a film, Nadia Butterfly, not to name it, was selected in Cannes last year. That was the only Canadian film in official selection in Cannes. And the film's been very, very difficult to sell. And we would have expected a little more support from distributors and whatsoever, but it's quite difficult. You know, the art house world has shrunken. There's a lot of films. It doesn't mean that there's many films, and more. The more we go, the more countries are producing films, and the art house films are coming out. Like, you know, we had, like, just in the Middle East, les Émirats Arabes are, you know, they even had a film in the Oscars for best foreign language. So like many years ago, we didn't have as many, you know, countries doing that, because I think countries are investing in their cinema because it's culture, and it's a way for them to actually expose their culture worldwide. So countries are investing more and more into the film world, because it's a great way to export. You know, it's a great way to do the PR of who they are as a country. But that creates a lot of films. And sometimes when producers don't understand why films aren't selling, what I can say is, you know, and the ones that have understood is, I bring them to a market, let's say Berlin, and then they see all the sales agents, and each sales agent, all the film catalogs that they're selling at the same time. And some, you know, even some filmmakers said, I've been to the Berlin market, now I understand what kind of business you're in. Because, you know, for all the new films I have, and that's only, like, Quebec is producing, what, 35 films a year. Canada, I don't know. The rest of the world are all pumping out films. They're all trying to find a space, you know? So festivals have the more and more control on destinies of the films. Getting it exposed is really important. As Nicolás and Liza were saying, you need to expose, but at one point, it's a question of, you know, you can advertise all you want. There needs to be a connection. Roma, it was people wanted to know what the hell was behind Roma. They wanted to understand what was this phenomenon of Netflix buying a black and white, you know, Mexican film. It was like, it was a perfect storm. And
there's the director, there are the prizes, the film won, you know, so many.
And it's a great film, you know, but on the other hand, there's a lot of great films that are not finding homes because there's a question of timing, because there's a question of maybe 2 years down the line, Netflix wouldn't have bought Roma because they had other, it's sometimes you're saying there's the film gods that need to intervene, and sometimes I'm praying a lot for them to come, because it's quite difficult. It's really challenging.
Because that's a thing that I see very often. Those films in Quebec and Canada and elsewhere, films that do so well in festivals, they do so many, they win prizes, they come with those amazing reputations, and then they play for 1 week in Montreal, in Toronto, in smaller theaters, in Cineplex. Should we maybe think of going VOD sooner, maybe release on the screen and on VOD sooner to reach more people? And pandemic aside, would that be a way to reach people quicker, Annick?
I think this is more a question for Robert than me, because, you know, we're trying to maximize, like, we're a sales agent. So basically we deal with distributors all over the world, like the mongrels, like, you know, the E1s and whatsoever. And people want to maximize and monetize their investment. So obviously, you know, when we're sort of establishing, you know, holdbacks on windows, you know, theatrical, VOD, SVOD, et cetera, they're challenging us because they want to commit sooner. But I think on the ground, you know, if Cineplex is taking a film and they know that 2 weeks later it's coming out on SVOD or on video or whatever, you know, they are making a call and they're holding up to their own, you know, model. But I don't want to answer for Robert, but, you know, and it's, I think we're changing and we need to adapt. And what is that fine tuning of finding what is the average, you know, the average best window? If we were talking with Americans, they would say, well, what the hell, we've all collapsed our windows. To this day, I don't know if that's good or bad. I think it depends of the film. It depends of a lot of things, but I think Robert should be answering.
So let me ask Rob, what do you think?
But you're doing so well. I think we have to, it's great to throw everything on PVOD and other forms, but I guess the question is, what do we deem success to be in all of this? Do we deem success just the ability to people to see things, or is success monetary? Do we want a industry that generates income like the rest of the world does to a degree, and we say that success is measured by this? And I think we need to figure out what we believe success is. Festivals are great. You'll see a whole bunch of people who are festival people who will go and take chances because it's a film festival. And then when it becomes a commercial entity, they just know, for whatever reason, they just no longer take those chances anymore. They'll go and they'll pay $30 at a film festival to go watch a film, but they won't pay $17 when it opens commercially. And that's not because of availability of that title. The title was the same film that was in that film festival is still opening up at the Latin Quarter in Montreal. But the question is, what makes them go to this experience and not this experience? How do we market to them better in our experience to get them to come? We're not looking to pull anybody off after 2 weeks. We want every film that we put in to be a success, but we have a monetary business. And as we talk about windows and that, the window is there really to create a period to allow monetization to take place for us. That's really what it's there to do.
But then, you know, let's go back to Roma. It's such a great example with the topic we have today, which was shown in theaters and then Netflix. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, there were a few screenings, regular screenings in theaters. Some people were lucky a little bit. I don't know, Cineplex, you can tell me.
So what I would say about Roma is, let's put Roma in where it should be. This is a world-class director who is coming off of Gravity.
Yeah.
Decided to make a 2.5-hour black and white film that spoke to him about his experiences in Mexico. Fantastic marketing angle. It was Netflix's first big film that they had purchased, that they really put the Netflix marketing muscle behind to get it out there. It played in theaters around the world, some of them quite limited because it was Netflix.
There you go.
To allow them to do it. But it is an anomaly compared to somebody just buying a film out of a festival that doesn't have all that behind it.
Let me give you a local example then. What about The Decline, Jusqu'au déclin? Patrice Laliberté, Québécois film, the first Québécois film that was produced by Netflix. So a similar story as Roma, but not a known filmmaker. I don't have the numbers as of today, but 3 months after the release on Netflix, there was like 20 million people had seen it on Netflix. These are numbers we never see for Québécois films. So did you at Cineplex think, I wish I could have shown it on my screens?
I will, first of all, we can have a debate about Netflix's numbers, about what they actually
Of course,
mean.
yeah. They count a film as
2 minutes isn't
after 2 minutes. Yeah, I know.
You can walk away from your laptop and it auto starts playing the next film, and that's an intent. So we can talk about what those numbers actually represent. But listen, we're looking to play every film that we can. Our model is based on a window currently, which allows us to maximize a film within the theatrical experience until it goes to the next phase. What I'll say about that window, though, specifically is that window generates a lot of downstream revenue for a company. The excitement, the marketing, everything that is created through a theatrical experience takes it from next window to next window to next window to next window, which inherently we don't always see when you just go to that window. So the question again comes back to, how do we label success moving forward? Is it just having films seen, or is it really about creating films that sustain a financial model that drives the whole industry forward? And I think that's a question we've been grappling with for the longest time. We hear it all the time. Our film was so huge in festivals, and then we give them a screen and no one comes. And no one can really explain to us why they didn't come. It wasn't the filmmaker's fault. It wasn't our fault for putting it up. It wasn't the distributor's fault for taking a chance. But somehow there is a disconnect between the festival world and the commercial world. And we need to close that gap to make people understand that the quality of the film, whether it's on a festival or in a commercial space, is worth getting off your couch and paying a little bit of money to come out and support those filmmakers and the industry and the idea of a commercial Canadian industry.
I'm a big fan myself of the theater experience, but I'm going to ask the audience, should we maybe try to, show films, VOD and theaters at the same time-ish, let's say? Should it be released pretty much at the same time, the same day, the same week? Is that something you wish for? This is for the people who are watching at home who wants to keep the conversation going on Reddit. So you can answer that question so we can get that debate going after this panel. Maybe going back to, as we want our films, our national film to travel, is there sometimes the stereotype of what a Canadian film should be? Because I know that many co-production with France for a long time, let's say in Quebec and France, a film had to have sleigh dogs and, you know, sugar shacks. Is that still a thing, Annick, that you're stuck with stereotypes of what a Canadian film should be?
Well, I'm certainly not going for sleigh dogs and sugar shacks.
Me neither, but
and hockey doesn't travel. I can tell you that. You know, no, it's what we're trying to do as a sales agent is export films that we feel passionate about, that we feel that, you know, we know that the films we're taking are a lot of work for sometimes very little revenue. I'll give you an example, Antigone, that was representing Canada at the Oscars. It didn't go further, but it was an amazing film. And it was a film that it was a wonder to discover, and it launched in TIFF and people were coming out and some were in tears. And this is why we do the business we do. It's when we see that people are connecting with the screen, and these are the types of Quebec and Canadian films we want to export that are changing a little bit the world in a small way. But there's, you know, when you see those films, then you feel very proud of being Quebecer or Canadian and saying this is a film that there's a thought process behind, there's a lot of talent, and there's a lot of hard work and energy. And the film, you know, we sold it quite well, but it was minimal revenue. So this is what we're trying to focus on, you know, Déesse des Mouches Feu, Antigone, Nadia Butterfly. Like, these are all prestige films that we think are making a difference. They're not necessarily your standard, you know, rom-com or whatsoever. And then, you know, the standard rom-com, there is a market for that. I'm not denying it. We would like to have, you know, films that are a little more commercial, because for the energy we put in, thank God we're passionate, and thank God we really believe in the film business and believe in defending it, because I wouldn't be in this. Because if I'm there for the money, then I should be in real estate, and quite honestly. So I think the films that are traveling are, you know, like Xavier Dolan has a very solid signature. You know, when you're looking at a Xavier Dolan film, they're all different. There's some, you know, that have given different views and whatsoever, but Xavier has such a strong voice, and he's still in Quebec. He hasn't moved south. He's, you know, and he's been faithful to Quebec and faithful to Canada in that way. So we're trying to find films that are, you know, great in storytelling, but also are able to do it in an artistic way where the voice is strong. Mm-hmm. And whether it's a Filipino film, whether it's a Mexican film, if your voice is able to carry and travel the barriers of the different cultures, then that film will travel. And I think that's what we're aiming for sure.
Nicolás, do you feel that in Mexico you went past that stereotype of what the Mexican film is? Clearly, there's a creative, there's a lot of excitement, I think, from my perspective, around Mexican films that are very originals.
Yeah, I do feel that there's this great expectation in festivals, for example, for Mexican films. Like, I do feel that when they receive Mexican films, there's an interest to program them, and I think there's so many voices happening right now, and that's because there's a big incentive by the government to finance movies that do not necessarily pursue any, you know, economic purpose. You know, so if you do movies up to $1 million, that's the cap you can get by the government, then you can do the movie about whatever you want. So that gives you freedom, you know, and as you know, in the film business, as more money you have, more concessions for that money, you know. So, you know, you see $20 million movies that probably have more concessions because of casting, because of story, because of who's the director, etc. But, you know, so small movies that for $1 million, and I would say small because that's kind of, you can do it, you can ask for 200, 300,000, but that allows you to have creative freedom. So that's why I think you've seen so many new voices coming from Mexico in documentary or in fiction, you know, and that has been very good for me because I'm kind of this new wave of the Mexican cinema, where like my biggest secret is to do very authentic films with very strong roots, you know, that, you know, at the end they can be exported and then connect, let's say, underground with the other roots, and, you know, become appealing to different cultures. And that's kind of my strongest asset, because I'm not trying to do American films. I'm not trying to do, you know, movies necessarily with stars. You know, the origin of these films come from, you know, authentic needs. That would answer also the question you did to Claudia about the things. Sorry, the question to Anik, that there was an expectation of Mexican films having certain topics, you know, having, you know, speaking about narco and cartels. And for me, for example, it's like speaking speaking about it in a way, you know, I'm passionate about it. I'm curious in life. And that way, for example, in movies like Birds of Passage, that it's Colombian, but at the end it became like an international film that, you know, had topics that connected to things that happen also in Mexico, but in a very, you know, local and truthful way. And I feel that at the end you have to create, as Liza said, events of the movies, even if it's a small movie or a big movie. And I always expect my movies to be commercial, you know, and that's something important, because sometimes they say like, oh, you just do festival movies or art house movies. And I think that my goal is to do commercial movies with good quality, you know, instead of, you know, like to have movies full of protein instead of, you know, of sugar. And that also, like what I change in the way of filmmaking, the way I produce my films, is to have the expectations really with the feet on the ground, because I know if my movie costs $5 million and I just want to do it very personal, very author driven, you know, I might not recoup. So how can I make movies with quality that are not a big challenge to recoup? Because I feel that, and you know, that it doesn't depend on how many days I'm in the cinema, or if I have to win the Golden Palm, you know, to recoup my movie. I just have to understand my expectations. If this is a first movie, what do I want? The director to be positioned because I want to do, you know, their next movie and the next one. So I want to, you know, position their careers, or I just want to do, you know, a bigger scope movie. So for me, that's the key as a producer, because, you know, what happened with Roma is that it had everything, you know, prestige, festivals, it played everywhere, theatrical experience, it was an event, awards, this, and for me, that was a big, like, lesson, you know. I'm not expecting to have that success in all of my movies. I have to analyze each case and say like, well, this movie, if it just plays locally, you know, that's amazing. If I manage the movie I'm doing, which is, you know, it's not announced, but it's actually a remake from a movie from Canada. You know, I'm prepping that movie, and I'm aiming that movie just to, you know, that it has to work with the Mexican audience.
So it's a scoop. We can't know what film you're remaking. It's a secret.
No, it's a big Canadian success, and I said like, this can play in Mexico amazingly. I'm not just copying the movie. I wanna, you know, make it locally, and I want to do like, you know, and take the good parts of that movie and say like, well, how can I make it local? Because I want the people in my country to relate to our cinema. That's something I'm very interested. But how am I gonna do it? It's like, you know, changing the way it has been happening, which is just, you know, doing like movies that have an expiration date, you know.
Liza, you seem to agree with so many things that Nicolás was saying. I saw you agree with all the way through, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I relate so much with the definition of success that both Robert and Nicolás is trying to explain. You really have to understand what's the goal, what's your vision for what's the track that you want to create for the films that you're supporting. So for the Philippines, we do understand what we also have that kind of expectation when it comes to what's a Filipino film. So Filipino films is known to create films that are based on social realities. It's commentaries on the current situation that's happening in our country, our history. Of course, there's even this word about poverty porn, where, of course, as a developing country, we have a lot of stories about less fortunate Filipino people, and you know, highlighting that in the film. And this has traveled in festivals. We have to accept that it's part of the Filipino culture. But as an agency, of course, as a film agency, our goal is to diversify. Our goal is to make sure that there's not only one facet of the Philippines that's being seen by the international market or the global audience, that there are so many aspects to a Filipino story. There's so many aspects about the Filipino people that they don't know yet. And this is what we do. We have a program called Spotlight Philippines, where we partner with different film festivals all over the world. They're probably in very important festivals, but not really A-list festivals. But these are films that would allow to partner with us so we can showcase more than one Filipino film in that festival. And in that way, you know, international audiences get to know not just the filmmakers that are featured in A-list film festivals, but a lot of up-and-coming filmmakers from our country, as notable, as talented, has stories that are very Filipino, very local, very indigenous, that these international audiences can experience and appreciate as well. And this is what we do. We have been doing this for the last 5 years, and since then we have exposed and promoted more than 100 films in the last 2 years. So this is really a huge opportunity for the Philippines to showcase not just the films that they're used to, but Filipino film directors and stories that are not normally, you know, about poverty, you know, showcasing that we have big houses in the Philippines, you know, you know, all of those stories. And it's so funny how what you hear from audiences when they go outside the cinemas and they see that, you know, there is a very, very strong middle class in the Philippines. There are also an elite class in the Philippines that are not normally experienced, you know, when they watch these films. So this is the kind of successes that we also consider in the FDCP whenever we support any kind of films that are going out there.
One last quick question to everyone about the language. Is there, let's start with Liza, a question about should we make the films in English to reach a wider audience, or is using the local language important? Because some people don't like subtitles still today, or don't like dubbing. What's your take on the language of the film?
I think actually we're going towards that path of experimenting, creating films in English, because we have a lot of Filipinos all over the world. We have a lot of Filipino Americans as well that are used to the language. English is our second language. So this is something very new. And now that we're becoming more international, more global, this is a specific and very intentional direction that some of our producers are taking right now. So for me, as long as, you know, it can expand the slate of what we can showcase as Filipino films and Philippine cinema, you know, we will fully support that.
Nicolás, you were saying that you grew up reading your films, so clearly subtitles, they don't bother you when looking at international cinema.
Yeah, I think that the audience is, you know, prepared to read subtitles. Only certain films are like by law, like they need to be dubbed, sorry, like animation and for kids. But, you know, we're working to change that. And I feel it's very important to have movies spoken in their organic language. Like, I think that when the production boom started in Mexico, you know, smart producers and directors stand saying, well, I'm gonna just, you know, put some characters that come from the US, since we're next, you know, countries next to each other, that we put characters speaking in English, and that doesn't work. I completely feel that it has to be everything organic and good storytelling. Sometimes, we just feel that it's changing the language opens, an international market, but that's not necessarily. For example, we have a big indigenous community in Mexico. It's a big part of the population. And, you only see indigenous films on documentaries, but we don't have, there's a big market also to do romantic comedies and, to explore many different ways of local movies that can be spoken in different languages. That was like what happened in Birds of Passage, that it's spoken in Guayú, that it was shot in the Guajira in Colombia. And I feel that it worked really well. In Roma, we have also some Mixteco language. And I feel that we have to take those risks in those directions, not to relearn how to look again to each other, and not just thinking to do practical things to make our movies more, more appealing to a market, because that hasn't worked for me ever,
But is that something you hear, Annick, when trying to sell a film? It's in French, is it dubbed? Is that something, or we don't like subtitles? Is that something that comes up from time to time or often?
I hear everything. So I hear the Quebec language we can understand. So that I hear a lot. I hear, if you have an English language film which is average, and you have a French language film which is average, your English film will do better. There's no question there. This being said, I do feel the idea of the film needs to be organic. If it's forcing, if it's, you need to put it in English because you think it's going to go, like, you need to do the film you need to do. The film needs to be done. Like, the film that needs to be done is a film that deserves to be done, in the sense of, if you're pushing a co-production and it smells co-production all over, it won't work. What I have seen lately is, because of Parasite winning the best film at the Oscars last year, I feel that there's a little more openness from our neighbors down south, which I've been able to sell a genre film in French, which a few years ago would have never happened. So I think that's interesting. And I'm hearing people, distributors saying, yeah, we're opening up a little more to a foreign language, but that depends, depends on the flavor of the month or whatsoever, because it's really hard. You have countries where, let's say in Quebec, we're used to dub language. We're also used to subtitles. In the hard, in the language, like the UK, the US, where they're not used to other languages, then it becomes a little more challenging. So I think Parasite has done a little more than I would have expected it to do in terms of opening up minds. It hasn't solved anything, dramatically, but there is that hope. I do feel that if you have a film which is an art house film, then it needs to be done in the language it's supposed to be done in. If it's more of a commercial type of story and whatsoever, like the other day someone said, oh, we have this great German rom-com. You know what? Really hard. So I would tend to say, if you're going on the commercial route, English is still king. Art house, do the film you need to do.
The last we are going to hear of is Rob. What do you think? I know that I said earlier you were a big advocate of bringing films in different languages in Canada, but that, as you say, for different community, you really curate the films you put here and there. So tell me, what do you think about the language of the films that you show at Cineplex? Are people still scared of subtitles?
In English Canada, yes. But having said that, I think language is like any other tool for a filmmaker to use, whether it's lighting or anything else. If the filmmaker feels that a specific language for their film, whether it's Quebecois in Quebec or English in Canada, or if they want to use an indigenous language to tell their story, and they feel that is the best tool that they have to deliver their storytelling and their passion, that's what the filmmaker should do. I think Nicolás said it's about the authenticity of the story and how we present the story. And I think passion is what people get past when they get past subtitles. If a film is connecting with them, if they take a chance on something, they'll get past the subtitles because the passion of the filmmakers will carry through. Antigone would not be any better or worse if it was in English. In fact, I think it would probably been worse because the passion of the filmmakers weren't leaning that way. I think we have to look at it in that way. As it relates to international cinema that we play in Canada, it's really, we're catering to those homegrown audiences that are in Canada. So for Filipino film, we play Filipino areas of Canada that first or second generation Filipino audiences come to watch, and it gives them a connection to being home. They're looking at things that other people in the Philippines are looking roughly at the same time, since most of what we play is day and date with international territories. So they have a common language and a common conversation with their friends and family back home. And Canadian film can do that. I honestly believe Canadian film can do that for expats all around the world, where they get a sense of what it truly means to be Canadian through their cinema in other parts of the world. That is the goal, I think, that we all want.
And we conclude with this word full of faith. Oh, Nick would like to say something more.
I wanted to add one thing. I had the experience of selling Mommy internationally. And when I read the script, it was in pure Quebec slang. And I was thinking of my French audience and the French distributors saying to me, Anik, it's like, we can't understand the language. This is going to be problematic. The accent. So we bring Mommy, and then all of a sudden the French are going berserk on it. They're saying this is, and no one mentioned the accent. So for all the other Quebec films that I brought, that people, distributors said to me, oh, the accent is the problem. Initially, what was happening is the accent wasn't the problem, the film was the problem, and they weren't connecting with it. If they are able to connect with the film, then whatever accent, whatever language, whatever anything, they're just connecting with the material. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you so much for sharing all those perspectives with me today. Thank you to the Academy of Film and Television for having us. Thank you Nicolás, Celis, Annick Poirier, Rob Cousins, and Liza Diño. Liza, it's the middle of the night for you. Go to bed, all of you. Thank you so much for being with us. And the conversation is continuing on Reddit. So please join us. We want to hear your opinions on everything we discussed today. So there will be this moderated discussion on Reddit. So we're waiting to hear from you. So thank you all. See you soon, hopefully in a theater. Au revoir. À bientôt.